To disassemble the clutch, remove the following components: the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch backing plate, the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch plate assembly, the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch waved plate, the output sun gear thrust bearing assembly, the output sun gear assembly, the low reverse and 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch housing assembly, the low and reverse clutch apply plate, the low and reverse clutch plates with low and reverse clutch plate assemblies, the low and reverse clutch backing plate, the low and reverse clutch assembly, and the 2/6 clutch plate assembly. To disassemble the input, reaction, and output carrier, remove the following components: the output carrier assembly, the output carrier thrust bearing assembly, the input sun gear thrust bearing assembly, the input carrier assembly, the input sun gear, the input sun gear thrust bearing assembly, the input carrier thrust bearing assembly, the reaction carrier assembly, the reaction carrier sun gear assembly, and the reaction carrier sun gear thrust bearing. To disassemble the 3/5 reverse and 4/5/6 clutch housing, use the J5586-A snap ring pliers to remove the turbine shaft retainer ring. Then remove the following components: the turbine shaft, the reaction carrier hub assembly, and the reaction carrier hub thrust bearing assembly. To disassemble the 4/5/6 clutch plate, remove the following components: the 4/5/6 clutch backing plate retaining ring, the 4/5/6 clutch backing plate, the 4/5/6 clutch plate assemblies, the 4/5/6 clutch apply plate, and the 4/5/6 clutch wave plate. To disassemble the 4/5/6 clutch piston, use the DT47951-2 spring compressor and J5586-A snap ring pliers to remove the clutch dam retaining ring. Place the 3/5 reverse and 4/5/6 clutch housing onto the support hub in the case. Apply shop air to the 4/5/6 clutch feed hole to dislodge the dam piston and the 4/5/6 clutch piston from the clutch housing. Remove the clutch dam and the 4/5/6 clutch piston return spring assembly. Remove the 4/5/6 clutch piston. Remove the 4/5/6 clutch piston inner seal. The 4/5/6 clutch piston outer seal, rounded, and the 4/5/6 clutch piston outer seal, stepped. To disassemble the reluctor wheel and piston, use the DT47694 piston spring compressor to compress the reluctor wheel just enough to clear the input shaft speed sensor reluctor ring retainer. Then, remove the input shaft speed sensor reluctor ring retainer. Caution: over-compressing the reluctor wheel will break the alignment tab and the clutch housings. Remove the input shaft speed sensor reluctor wheel. Next, remove the 3/5 reverse clutch piston. The 3/5 reverse clutch piston return spring assembly, the 3/5 reverse clutch piston inner reluctor seal, the 3/5 reverse clutch piston inner seal, and the 3/5 reverse clutch piston dam seal. To disassemble the 3/5 reverse clutch plate, push down on the backing plate and remove the 3/5 reverse clutch backing plate ring retainer. Remove the following components: the 3/5 reverse clutch backing plate, the 3/5 reverse clutch plate assemblies, and the 3/5 reverse clutch apply plate. To assemble the 3/5 reverse clutch plates, install the following components: the 3/5 reverse clutch apply plate, the 3/5 reverse clutch plates, the 3/5 reverse clutch plate assemblies, the 3/5 reverse clutch backing plate, and the 3/5 reverse clutch backing plate retainer ring. To assemble the reluctor wheel and piston, assemble the following components: the new 3/5 reverse clutch piston dam seal, the new 3/5 reverse clutch piston inner seal, and the new 3/5 reverse clutch piston inner reluctor seal. Then, install the 3/5 reverse clutch piston return spring assembly, the 3/5 reverse clutch piston, and the input shaft speed sensor reluctor wheel. Use the DT47-694 piston spring compressor to compress the reluctor wheel just enough to clear the retainer. Then, install the input shaft speed sensor reluctor retaining ring. To assemble the 456 clutch piston, install the following components: the 456 clutch piston inner seal, the 456 clutch piston outer seal, stepped, and the 456 clutch piston outer seal, rounded. Apply a thin coat of automatic transmission fluid to the inside diameter of the DT47-805 seal protector. Then, use the seal protector and the DT47-951-2 spring compressor to install the 456 clutch piston. To assemble the 456 clutch fluid dam, install the 456 clutch piston return spring assembly. Apply a thin coat of automatic transmission fluid to the inside diameter of the DT47-951-1 seal protector and install the 456 clutch piston fluid dam assembly. Use the spring compressor to install the 456 clutch dam retaining ring. To assemble the 456 clutch plates, install the following components: the reaction carrier hub thrust bearing assembly, the reaction carrier hub assembly, the 456 clutch wave plate, the 456 clutch apply plate, the 456 clutch plates, the 456 clutch plate assemblies, the 456 clutch backing plate, and the 456 clutch backing plate retaining ring. To assemble the turbine shaft, seat the turbine shaft. Use snap ring pliers to install the turbine shaft retainer ring. To assemble the input, reaction, and output carrier, install the following components onto the 3-5 reverse and 4-5-6 clutch housing assembly. The reaction carrier sun gear thrust bearing, the reaction carrier sun gear assembly, the reaction carrier assembly, the input carrier thrust bearing assembly, the input sun gear thrust bearing assembly, the input carrier assembly, the input sun gear, the input sun gear thrust bearing assembly, the output carrier thrust bearing assembly, the output carrier assembly, the first 2/6 clutch plate assembly, the 2/6 clutch plate, and the second 2/6 clutch plate assembly. To install the 3-5 reverse and 4-5-6 clutch housing and the input, reaction, and output carrier, install the 3-5 reverse and 4-5-6 clutch housing thrust bearing, the 2/6 clutch apply plate, and the 2/6 clutch plate. Align the large flat areas with the valve body end of the case and the 2 tabs on the clutch plate that are close to each other, with the slots at the bottom right corner of the case. Then install the 3-5 reverse and 4-5-6 clutch housing assembly and gear set. Align the large flat areas of the 2/6 clutch plate with the valve body end of the case and the 2 tabs on the clutch plate that are close to each other with the slots at the bottom right corner of the case. Install the low and reverse one-way clutch assembly. Align the large flat areas of the low and reverse clutch assembly with the valve body end of the case. Make sure the clutch assembly rotates freely. And then install the low and reverse clutch backing plate. Alternate the installation of the low and reverse clutch plate assemblies with the low and reverse clutch plates. Align the large flat areas of the low and reverse clutch plates with the valve body end of the case. Then, install the low and reverse clutch apply plate. Align the large flat areas of the low and reverse clutch apply plates with the valve body end of the case. To disassemble the low and reverse clutch piston, remove the low and reverse clutch spring retainer. The low and reverse clutch spring, and the low and reverse clutch piston. To disassemble the 1-2-3-4 clutch piston, remove the 1-2-3-4 clutch spring retainer. The 1-2-3-4 clutch spring and the 1-2-3-4 clutch piston. To clean and inspect the low and reverse and 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch housing, use clean solvent and air dry the components. Inspect the following areas for wear, damage, or porosity: the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch spring retainer groove, the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch piston bore, the low and reverse clutch spring retainer groove, the low and reverse clutch piston bore, the clutch oil passages, and the air bleed passages. To assemble the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch piston, apply a thin coat of automatic transmission fluid to the outer diameter of the DT47-798 seal protector, and then install the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch piston. Place the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch spring retainer onto the DT47-799-1 clutch piston spring retainer sleeve. Compress the DT47-799-2 clutch piston spring compressor to install the retainer in the groove. Apply shop air to the clutch fluid feed hole in the clutch housing to verify proper piston operation. To assemble the low and reverse clutch piston, apply a thin coat of automatic transmission fluid to the outer diameter of the DT47807 clutch piston seal protector, and then install the low and reverse clutch piston. Install the low and reverse clutch piston spring. Place the low and reverse clutch spring retainer onto the DT47-794-1 spring compressor part. Compress the spring retainer with the DT47-794-2 to install the retainer in the groove. Apply shop air to the clutch fluid feed hole in the clutch housing to verify proper piston operation. To install the low and reverse and 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch housing and the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch plate, install the low and reverse and 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch housing with the longer legs faced towards the bottom of the case. Install the output sun gear assembly. The 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch waved plate with a single pair of tabs aligned with the bottom valve body end of the case. Both of the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch plates paired with the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch plate assemblies and the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch backing plate with the single skinny tab aligned with the case spline facing the top of the case. Use the J28585 snap ring remover to install the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch backing plate retainer ring with the taper facing away from the backing plate. The retainer opening should be aligned with the largest gap in the case splines toward the bottom of the case. Install the retainer with care to avoid damage to the machined surface of the case in the park pawl area. Burrs or raised edges can cause the park pawl to bind and not engage the park pawl gear. Clean and inspect the drive sprocket thrust washer, drive sprocket retainer ring, drive sprocket bearing assembly, park gear, driven sprocket, and the drive link assembly. To install the drive sprocket, driven sprocket, and drive link, first install the front differential carrier baffle and secure it with 2 bolts. Torque the bolts to specification. Then install the drive link lube scoop seals. Drive link lube scoop driven sprocket bearing assembly, and the drive sprocket bearing assembly. The drive link drive sprocket assembly and driven sprocket assembly must be installed at the same time. The drive link should be installed with the colored links or part number face up. The drive link, drive sprocket assembly, and driven sprocket assembly has a slight interference fit. A gentle tap from a soft tip hammer will install them. Install the park pawl spring, and park pawl shaft. Make sure the park pawl moves freely. The front differential carrier is only serviced as an assembly. Clean the front differential carrier with clean solvent and air dry the components. Inspect the parts for scoring, wear, or damage. To install the front differential carrier, install the final drive sun gear to differential housing bearing assembly, differential carrier assembly, and the front differential carrier bearing assembly.